Inside the hall, Li Jing heard the voice. He felt the heat radiating through the heavy wooden doors. He gripped his mace, his knuckles turning white, his heart filled with a fear he could no longer name. He had destroyed the temple. He had smashed the statue. He had won, or so he thought. But as he walked toward the door, he knew that the summer was truly over. The ghost of his son had returned as a god, and the walls of Chentang Pass would not be enough to save him. The confrontation that followed would be one of the most famous duels in mythology, a battle between a father's rigid law and a son's divine fury. It would be a fight that would travel across the provinces, leading to the intervention of even greater immortals. But as Nezha stood in the courtyard, his fire-tipped spear pointed at the ground, he was no longer looking for his father's love. He was looking for the end of the story. The lotus had bloomed in the cave, and now it had come to the mud of the pass. The recreation of Nezha was complete, and the world of the Shang dynasty was about to feel the heat of his return. The fire was lit, the wheels were spinning, and the Lotus Prince was ready to claim his place in the stars. The heavy gates of Chentang Pass had withstood the sieges of mortal armies and the rising tides of the Dragon Kings, but they were never designed to hold back a ghost that had mastered the fire of the heavens. As Nezha descended into the courtyard on his wind-fire wheels, the air turned into a shimmering wall of heat. The soldiers, men who had spent their lives following the iron commands of General Li Jing, found themselves paralyzed by a presence that defied their understanding of life and death. They saw the third prince, but he was no longer the child they had watched playing on the battlements. He was a figure of jade and flame, a celestial warrior whose every breath sent ripples of golden light through the humid air of the pass. Li Jing stood at the top of the stone stairs leading to his private hall. In his hands, he gripped a heavy iron mace, a weapon that had served him in 100 battles. But as he looked down at the boy standing upon wheels of fire, he felt the weight of the iron, as if it were a leaden anchor pulling him into an abyss. He saw the lotus skin, the glowing eyes, and the fire-tipped spear that hummed with an ancient, predatory hunger. The general knew that the laws of man and the codes of fatherhood had no meaning here. He had tried to erase his son, to smash the memory of the spirit pearl into the dust of the mountain, and now the universe was returning that energy with interest. Li Jing, Nezha's voice rose from the center of the courtyard, carrying the resonance of a shattering mountain. You destroyed my temple. You smashed the image that the people built in my honor. You denied my spirit the smoke of the incense and the peace of the silence. Today, there are no more debts. There is only the settling of accounts. Li Jing, driven by a mixture of desperate pride and lingering fear, did not offer words of apology. He could not. To him, Nezha was still the anomaly, the et topu, the creature that disrupted the rigid order of his world. "You are a demon," the general roared, his voice cracking under the pressure of the heat. "You were born of chaos, and you have returned as a ghost to haunt the righteous. I will send you back to the void myself." With a scream of defiance, Li Jing lunged. He swung his mace with a strength born of pure survival, a blow that would have crushed the skull of any mortal man. But Nezha did not move. He did not need to. As the iron mace closed the distance, Nezha raised the universe ring. The impact was not a clash of metal. It was a detonation of divine force. The iron mace did not just break. It shattered into 500 pieces, the shards flying through the air like lethal hail. Li Jing was thrown backward, his hands scorched and his spirit broken by the sheer ease of the boy's defense. Nezha did not strike immediately. He watched his father crawl toward the stairs, a man stripped of his authority and his strength. The Lotus Prince felt a cold, sharp satisfaction, but there was also a hollow void where the son's heart should have been. The Lotus body did not possess the warmth of human blood. It possessed the purity of justice. He raised the fire-tipped spear, the flames at its tip licking the air like the tongues of serpents. "Run, Li Jing," Nezha whispered, and though he did not shout, his voice was heard by every soul in the fortress. "Run as far as the winds can carry you. Run until the earth ends and the stars begin. I will follow your scent. I will follow the sound of your heartbeat. Today, the hunter has become the prey." Li Jing, realizing that the walls of the fortress were no longer his sanctuary, turned and fled. He did not go to his wife. He did not go to his soldiers. He ran through the back gates of the pass, heading toward the mountains, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind a whirlwind of terror. Behind him, he heard the rhythmic, high-pitched whistling of the wind-fire wheels, a sound that seemed to mock the frantic pace of his mortal feet. The chase that followed is one of the most harrowing narratives in the ancient texts. It was not a race of distance, but a race of psychological endurance. Li Jing ran across the jagged plains of the east, his boots tearing against the sharp stones, his lungs burning as if he were breathing the very fire Nezha commanded. Every time he stopped to catch his breath, he would see the red glow of the armillary sash on the horizon, or he would hear the roaring of the flames from the wheels. Nezha was not hurrying. He was pacing himself, savoring the reversal of power. He was the storm following a man who had spent his life trying to command the weather. Li Jing reached the shores of the great ocean, thinking perhaps the water would protect him from the fire of the boy. But the waves offered no sanctuary. He looked back and saw Nezha gliding over the water, the wind-fire wheels turning the blue surf into white steam. The boy moved with a grace that was as beautiful as it was terrifying, the fire-tipped spear held low at his side. Li Jing turned toward the high peaks of the Kunlun Mountains, hoping to find a cave or a temple where he could hide. As he climbed the steep, icy slopes, his strength began to fail. He fell to his knees, his hands bleeding from the sharp ice. He looked up and saw Nezha standing on a ledge above him, silhouetted against the setting sun. The boy looked like a god of war, the red sash fluttering in the mountain gale like a trail of blood. "Are you tired, father?" Nezha asked, his voice calm and melodic. "Does the earth feel heavy beneath your feet? I carried the weight of your hatred for 3 years in the womb and a lifetime in the pass. I think you can carry your fear for a few miles more." Li Jing, pushed to the edge of his sanity, raised his hands to the sky and cried out for mercy. He did not pray to the Jade Emperor nor to the kings of the sea. He cried out to the masters of the mountains, the immortals who had once trained him in the ways of the Tao. He begged for a sanctuary from the spirit of his own son. The heavens responded. Just as Nezha raised his spear to deliver the final blow, a cloud of iridescent mist descended upon the mountain peak. From the center of the mist emerged a figure of immense serenity and ancient power. This was Wenshu Guangfa Tianzun, a high immortal of the heavenly courts, a being whose wisdom was a pillar of the cosmic order. He stood between the father and the son, his presence cooling the air and quieting the roaring of the fire wheels. "Nezha," the immortal said, his voice like the chime of a silver bell in a quiet temple. "The debt you seek to settle is a debt of the soul, and such debts cannot be paid in blood. You have your body of Lotus. You have your place in the stars. To kill the father who sired your first life is to stain the purity of the flower you have become." Nezha's eyes flared with a desperate red light. "He destroyed my temple. He tried to kill me when I was a child of flesh, and he tried to erase me when I was a spirit of prayer. Where was the justice when he smashed the statue? Where was the mercy when he cursed my name?" The immortal did not argue. He knew the pain of the son was real, but he also knew the necessity of the father. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out a golden object. It was small, no larger than a child's toy, but it possessed a weight that made the mountain itself seem light. It was a pagoda, a tower of 7 tiers, crafted from a gold that did not exist in the mortal world. It was a treasure of the primordial heavens, a tool of absolute containment and spiritual refinement. Wenshu Guangfa Tianzun threw the pagoda into the air. As it rose, it began to grow. It did not grow in physical size alone. It grew in spiritual gravity. It began to spin, radiating a golden light that was so bright, Nezha was forced to shield his eyes. The pagoda descended upon the mountain peak, its base settling over Li Jing, who looked up with a mixture of terror and hope. Suddenly, another figure appeared, descending from the higher clouds. This was Randang Doran, the burning lamp Taoist, one of the most powerful beings in the Taoist hierarchy. He had come to finalize the pact between the father and the son. He landed beside Li Jing and placed his hand upon the golden pagoda. "Nezha," Randang Doran said, his voice carrying the authority of the beginning of time. "Your fire is great, but it lacks the containment of the law. Your father is a man of the law, but he lacks the fire of the spirit. From this day forward, you shall both serve the heavens, but you shall do so in a balance that neither of you can break." The burning lamp. Taoist turned to Li Jing. He spoke secret words into the general's ear, words that gave him the power to command the golden pagoda. He told him that as long as he held this tower, he possessed the ability to restrain the fire of his son. The pagoda was not just a shield, it was a prison and a teacher. If Nezha were to attack his father, the pagoda would open its gates, and the fire of the sun would draw the boy inside, trapping him within the 7 tiers of spiritual refinement until his anger had cooled. Li Jing reached out and touched the golden surface of the tower. He felt the power flowing into his hands, a power that was greater than any mace or army. He was no longer the hunted prey. He was the pagoda-bearing heavenly king, Li Tianwang. The transformation was complete. The mortal general of Chentang Pass had been elevated to a celestial guardian, not because of his goodness, but because of his necessity in the balance of the universe. Nezha looked at the golden tower, and he felt a cold, sharp realization. The heavens had intervened to save the father from the son. The divine order required the hierarchy of the family to remain intact, even if that family was built on a foundation of bone and fire. He saw the pagoda in his father's hands, and he knew that his days of pursuit were over. He could not fight the golden light of the tower. It was the light of the same stars that had birthed his soul. "Is this the justice of the heavens?" Nezha asked, his voice low and bitter. "To give a cage to the man who tried to kill me?" "It is the peace of the heavens," Randing Doran replied. "You are the spear, Nezha. Your father is the tower. The spear needs a home, and the tower needs a protector. Go now, return to your master. The time of your war is coming, and you will need to stand beside your father, not against him." Nezha turned his wind-fire wheels and shot into the sky, a streak of red light that did not look back. He returned to the golden light cave, his heart filled with a complex, simmering silence. He had his life, and he had his power, but he also had the knowledge that his father would always carry the golden tower, the symbol of his restraint. Li Jing, left on the mountain peak, looked at the pagoda in his hands. He felt a profound sense of relief, but he also felt the weight of the burden. He had been given the power to control his son, but he had lost the chance to ever truly be his father. He was now a king of the heavens, a guardian of the gates, forever tethered to the child he had once tried to destroy. This moment in the myth marks the end of the domestic tragedy and the beginning of the cosmic epic. The conflict between Nezha and Li Jing was no longer a private matter of a household in Chentang Pass. It was a permanent feature of the celestial landscape. In every temple where the image of the pagoda-bearing king is found, he is holding that golden tower, and nearby, the third prince is often depicted with his spear and his wheels. They are a pair, bound together by the gold and the flame. The significance of the golden pagoda, the Linglong Baota, is profound. It represents the transition from the chaotic personal vengeance of the early myths to the structured, impersonal justice of the later Taoist and Buddhist traditions. It is the bridge between the rebellious youth of Nezha and his eventual role as a pillar of the heavenly host. The pagoda is the container for the storm, the vessel that allows the fire to be used for the benefit of the universe, rather than its destruction. But for the mortals who told these stories around their hearths, the lesson was more intimate. They saw the struggle of a son trying to find his own identity against the crushing expectations of a father. They saw the tragedy of a father who could only relate to his child through the lens of control. The golden pagoda was a solution, yes, but it was also a reminder of the scars that families leave upon one another, scars that even the immortals cannot fully heal. Nezha would eventually learn to work with his father. In the great battles to come, when the Shang dynasty would fall and the Zhou would rise, the pagoda-bearing king and the Lotus third prince would fight side by side. They would become the primary generals of the heavenly armies, their combined power becoming a force that even the most ancient demons could not withstand. But the tension would always remain, a low-frequency hum like the vibration of the golden tower against the air. As we conclude this chapter of the chase and the confrontation, reflect on the image of the golden pagoda shining on the mountain peak. It is a symbol of order, of containment, and of the complex, often painful ways that peace is achieved. Nezha had returned from the dead to claim his justice, and he had found instead a new role in a world that was much larger than his anger. The fire was still burning, the wheels were still spinning, but the spirit pearl had finally found the boundaries of its world. The Lotus Prince was no longer a son of Chentang Pass. He was a soldier of the heavens, and the war for the soul of the empire was about to begin. The transition from a personal vendetta to a cosmic crusade is a path walked by few. Yet, it is the path that defines the true nature of a deity. To understand Nezha's role in the Great War between the Shang and Zhou dynasties, one must first envision the decaying grandeur of the Shang Empire. This was an era where the sun was setting on 1,000 years of tradition, eclipsed by the madness of King Zhou and the malevolent influence of the fox spirit, Daji. The air in the capital city of Jiaoge was no longer filled with the incense of righteous ritual, but with the heavy, metallic scent of blood and the smoke of pyres. The heavens had turned their gaze away from the house of Shang, and the mandate of heaven, the Tianming, was shifting like a tectonic plate toward the rising house of Zhou. In this time of profound instability, Nezha did not remain hidden in the golden haze of the Golden Light Cave. His recreation was not intended for a life of quiet contemplation. He was the Spirit Pearl, a weapon forged for the specific purpose of cleansing the world of corruption. Taiyi Genren, his master, saw the threads of fate tightening. He knew that the legendary strategist Zhang Zia was gathering an army of mortals and immortals alike to challenge the tyranny of the king. The call to war was not a request, it was an inevitability. Nezha stepped onto his windfire wheels, his red sash burning with an intensity that reflected the coming storm, and flew toward the front lines of history. Imagine the first time Nezha arrived at the camp of the Zhou army. The soldiers were hardened men, accustomed to the grit of Bronze Age warfare, but they fell silent as a youth wreathed in flame descended from the clouds. He stood before Zhang Zia, the wise old man with the white beard who fished with a straight hook, and offered his spear. In that moment, the Zhou army gained more than just a soldier. They gained a vanguard who did not know the meaning of fear or the limitation of human fatigue. Nezha was appointed as the lead vanguard, the tip of the spear that would pierce the heart of the Shang defenses. The battlefield of the Fengshen Yanyi, the investiture of the gods, was a theater of both physical and metaphysical horror. This was not merely a clash of shields and swords, it was a collision of arrays, enchantments, and divine treasures. The Shang generals were often Taoist renegades, or ancient spirits who possessed weapons capable of stealing a man's soul or turning an entire army into stone. But Nezha possessed a unique, terrifying advantage: his Lotus body. To understand why Nezha was so feared by the magicians of the Shang, we must reflect on the nature of the human spirit. In the cosmology of the time, most beings were governed by the Hun and the Po, the celestial and terrestrial souls. Many of the most powerful magical weapons of the era worked by attacking these souls. There were bells that, when rung, would shake a man's soul from his body. There were dusty fans that could dissolve a spirit into mist. But Nezha had neither Hun nor Po in the traditional sense. His body was plant matter, his spirit a distilled celestial essence. When the Shang magicians rang their soul-shattering bells at him, the sound waves simply passed through his lotus frame like wind through a screen. He would stand amidst the magical onslaught, unblinking and untouched, before lunging forward with his fire-tipped spear. One of the most famous encounters in this campaign was the battle against the 4 heavenly kings of the Mo family. These were brothers of immense size and power, each wielding a treasure that could level a city. There was Mo Li Jing, who carried a sword that could summon thousands of spears of fire. There was Mo Li Hong, who possessed a pearl-studded umbrella that could shroud the world in darkness and chaos. Mo Lihai played a jade mandolin that sent sonic waves to shatter the hearts of his enemies, and Mo Lishu carried a bag containing a creature known as the flower fox marten, which could grow into the size of an elephant and devour entire battalions. The Zhou army was paralyzed by the Mo brothers. The sheer scale of their elemental magic threatened to extinguish the rebellion before it could reach the capital. But Nezha, alongside other heroes like the sky-walking Yang Jian, stood at the forefront. Imagine the Lotus Prince darting through the air on his wheels, a streak of red light weaving through the spears of fire and the sonic blasts. He used the universe ring to strike at the Mo brothers' weapons, the golden circle clashing against divine bronze with a sound that could be heard in the highest heavens. It was in these moments that Nezha's temperament, his relentless, almost cold focus, became the Zhou's greatest asset. He did not fight for glory. He fought as a force of nature, an inevitable correction to a world gone wrong. Welcome to Hearths of Myths. Today, the air carries a scent of ancient lotus blossoms, and a warm, golden light begins to permeate the silence. We are walking the complete path of the Lotus Third Prince, Nezha. The air in the Chentang Pass did not merely move. It carried the weight of an era. To understand the beginning of our story, one must first envision the world under the waning sun of the Shang dynasty. This was a time when the boundaries between the mortal realms and the celestial spheres were as thin as a silk veil, where immortals walked the hidden peaks of Kunlun, and dragons coiled in the depths of the four great oceans. It was an age of high magic and profound ritual, a time when the actions of a single family could ripple across the cosmos. And at the heart of this world stood the fortress of Chentang, commanded by a man whose name was synonymous with rigid order and military discipline, Li Jing. Li Jing was a man of steel and stone. As the commanding general of the pass, his life was governed by the laws of his emperor and the ancient codes of filial piety and duty. He was not a man given to flights of fancy or the indulgence of the supernatural, despite his own early training under the immortal masters. He desired a life of stability, a lineage that would bring honor to his house. He already had 2 sons, Jinja and Muzha, both of whom were away training with prestigious immortals. But the third child was different before he even drew his first breath. We must turn our gaze to Lady Yin, Li Jing's wife, a woman of immense grace and silent endurance. For 3 years and 6 months, she had carried her third child. Let that duration settle in your mind. This was not a normal pregnancy. It was a cosmic anomaly that defied the laws of nature and medicine. In the villages surrounding the fortress, whispers began to coil like wood smoke. People spoke of demons, of cursed lineages, and of omens written in the flight of birds. Within the walls of the commander's residence, the atmosphere was even more suffocating. Imagine the long, silent corridors of the Li household, where the only sound was the rhythmic pacing of a general who felt his control slipping. Li Jing looked at his wife with a mixture of pity and growing suspicion. To him, anything that deviated so drastically from the natural order was an affront to the gods or a manifestation of a malignant spirit. Lady Yin, however, felt something else. Despite the physical toll of 42 months of gestation, she did not feel she was carrying a monster. She felt a heat, a vibrant, pulsing energy that resonated with the spirit of the earth itself. To understand why this child took so long to be born, we must look to the celestial archives, specifically the texts that describe the Lingzhu, the spirit pearl. This was no ordinary soul. The spirit pearl was a treasure of the primordial universe, a concentrated essence of light and power that resided in the golden light cave of Mount Qianyuan. It was a weapon of the gods, destined to be reincarnated at a specific moment in history, to serve as the vanguard of a new age. The delay was not a biological failure. It was a cosmic alignment. The soul was waiting for the exact alignment of the stars, the exact moment when the corruption of the Shang dynasty would reach its peak, necessitating a protector who was as fierce as he was pure. On the night of the birth, the sky over Chentang Pass changed. The stars seemed to pulse with a rhythmic golden light, and a strange, sweet fragrance, like lotus blossoms blooming in midwinter, filled the air. Lady Yin lay in her chambers, surrounded by midwives who were trembling with a fear they could not name. Li Jing stood outside the door, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his face a mask of iron. He was prepared for a birth, yes, but he was also prepared for an execution. When the cry finally came, it was not the wail of a newborn. It was a sound like a shattering bell. Li Jing burst into the room, and what he saw froze the blood in his veins. There, on the floor, was no child. There was a ball of flesh, glowing with a dull red inner light, spinning slowly like a top. It was as large as a ripened melon, and it radiated a heat that made the wooden floorboards groan. To Li Jing, this was the ultimate confirmation of his fears. This was not his son. This was a Yaogua, a demon born of his own house to disgrace his name. In a fit of righteous fury and terror, he drew his sword, a blade tempered in the fires of the heavens, and struck. With a single, powerful blow, he cleaved the flesh ball in two. But instead of blood and bone, a brilliant, blinding light erupted from the shell. It was as if a miniature sun had been released within the room. When the light dimmed, Li Jing and Lady Yin did not see a dead monster. They saw a young boy, perhaps 3 or 4 years of age, standing amidst the fragments of the red shell. He was beautiful, with skin as pale as jade, and eyes that sparkled with a mischievous, divine intelligence. He was not naked. He was clothed in a red sash that shimmered like liquid fire, and on his right wrist was a heavy, golden bracelet that pulsed with the rhythm of his own heart. This was the first appearance of the Chenkun Quan, the Universe Ring, and the Hun Tianling, the Armillary Sash. These were not mere ornaments. They were supreme treasures of the Taoist heavens, weapons given to him by the higher powers before he even touched the soil of the mortal world. The child did not cry. He looked at his father with a gaze that was both innocent and ancient. He looked at his mother and smiled. And in that moment, Lady Yin's 3.5 years of suffering were forgotten. But the tension was far from over. Li Jing was a man of logic, and even a beautiful child born of a flesh ball was a terrifying mystery. As he stood there, sword still drawn, a servant announced the arrival of a guest at the fortress gates. This was no ordinary traveler. It was Taiyi Genren, the great immortal Taiyi, the master of the Golden Light Cave. He had traveled from the high peaks because he knew that his disciple, the Spirit Pearl, had finally taken human form. Taiyi Genren entered the room with the quiet grace of a mountain mist. He ignored the general's sword and walked directly to the child. He laughed, a sound that seemed to clear the heavy, stagnant air of the room. He turned to Li Jing and congratulated him, though the general was still too stunned to speak. "This child," the immortal said, his voice carrying the resonance of the ancient texts, "is a gift from the heavens. He is born of the spirit pearl, and he will be the commander of the celestial armies. You must name him Nezha." Li Jing, still skeptical but cowed by the presence of a high immortal, accepted the name. Taiyi Genren then asked to take the boy as his disciple, promising to guide the immense power that dwelled within his small frame. He looked at the Chen-kun ring on the boy's wrist and the red sash around his shoulders, warning Li Jing that these were weapons of immense destruction. They were meant to protect the innocent, but in the hands of a child with the temperament of a storm, they could bring ruin to the world. The early years of Nezha's life in Chentang Pass were a study in contradiction. He grew with a speed that defied human biology, but it was his strength that truly terrified the servants and the soldiers. Imagine a toddler who could lift a stone lion as if it were a wooden toy, a child whose laughter could shake the tiles of the roof. Lady Yin loved him with a desperate, protective intensity, sensing the friction between her husband and her son. Li Jing, for his part, could not look at the boy without seeing the flesh ball and the sword stroke. He saw Nezha as a ticking clock, a force of chaos that he had to contain within the strict walls of his discipline. Nezha was a creature of pure emotion. He did not understand the nuances of mortal law or the delicate balance of power. He knew only what he felt, and what he felt was a boundless energy that needed to be released. He was often found in the training grounds of the fortress, watching the soldiers with an intensity that made seasoned veterans uncomfortable. He would sometimes try to join them, his small frame moving with a fluid, lethal grace that suggested he knew more about combat than their most decorated generals. But the fortress of Chentang was too small for him. The walls were too high, the rules too rigid. Nezha was a child of the universe, and he felt the pull of the elements. He was particularly drawn to the water. To the east of the pass lay the Nine Bend River, which flowed into the vast, mysterious expanse of the East Sea. It was a place of immense beauty and ancient power, the domain of the Dragon King Ao Guang. One day, when the heat of the summer sun was particularly oppressive, a heat that seemed to vibrate in Nezha's very bones, he asked his mother for permission to go to the river to bathe. Lady Yin, seeing the restlessness in his eyes, agreed, but she sent a guardian with him, a man named Li Gen. She warned Nezha to stay near the bank, to be respectful of the water, and to return before the sun touched the horizon. As Nezha walked toward the river, he carried with him the universe ring and the armillary sash. He did not know that he was carrying the keys to a disaster. He did not know that his presence at the river would be the catalyst for a war that would reach the highest courts of the Jade Emperor. He only knew that the water looked cool and that his skin felt like it was on fire. This is the point where the innocence of childhood meets the inevitability of myth. Nezha was not a malicious child, but he was a divine one, and a divine being, even when merely playing in a river, moves with a force that the mortal and subaquatic worlds cannot ignore. When he stepped into the Nine Bend River, he did not just displace the water, he disturbed the foundation of the undersea kingdom. The red armillary sash, the Hun Tianling, was a weapon of cosmic vibrations. As Nezha dipped it into the water to wash it, the sash began to pulse. It sent ripples through the river, ripples that grew into waves, and waves that turned into massive underwater tremors. Far below, in the crystal palace of the Dragon King, the very pillars began to shake. The coral gardens were uprooted, and the schools of golden fish fled in terror. The Dragon King, Ao Guang, sitting on his throne of pearls, felt the world shiver. To him, this was an act of war. No mortal, no matter how powerful, should have been able to shake the foundations of the East Sea. He sent his scout, the Yaksha Li Jing, to investigate. Nezha, meanwhile, was sitting on a rock, completely unaware of the chaos he had caused. He was enjoying the feeling of the water against his skin. When the Yaksha emerged from the waves, a terrifying blue-skinned creature with tusks and eyes like burning coals, Nezha did not run. He was curious. He looked at the monster and laughed. "Who are you?" Nezha asked, his voice bright and clear. "And why do you look so angry?" The Yaksha, insulted by the child's lack of fear and his casual tone, demanded to know who gave him the right to disturb the Dragon King's peace. He lunged with his heavy iron mace, intending to crush the small, pale boy who dared to play in their waters. But Nezha moved faster than the eye could follow. It was an instinctual movement, the spirit pearl reacting to a threat. He raised the universe ring. With a soft, musical clink, the golden circle struck the Yaksha's mace. The iron weapon shattered into 1,000 pieces. The Yaksha, stunned, tried to flee back into the depths, but Nezha, caught in the thrill of the fight, threw the ring. It struck the monster squarely in the chest, and the Yaksha was no more. Nezha stood on the bank, the universe ring returning to his hand like a loyal pet. He felt a surge of pride, a feeling of power he had never known. He had defeated a monster. He had proven himself. But in his heart, a seed of rebellion was beginning to sprout. He was no longer just the general's son who lived in a house of rules. He was Nezha, the warrior of the Lotus, the wielder of the heavens. And the Dragon King, he decided, would have to learn to share the water. This event, the slaying of the Yaksha, marks the end of Nezha's childhood and the beginning of his legend. It was the moment he stepped out of the shadow of his father's fortress and into the light of his own divine nature. But it was also the moment he drew a line in the sand, or rather, a ripple in the water, that could never be erased. Li Jing, back at the fortress, felt a sudden chill. He looked toward the east, where the sky was beginning to turn a deep, bruised purple. He knew that the peace he had worked so hard to maintain was over. He knew that his son had finally broken the world. As we prepare to look deeper into the conflicts that followed, remember the image of the boy on the riverbank. He is small, he is beautiful, and he is holding a golden ring that can shatter mountains. He is the incarnation of a cosmic pearl, born of an Et Topu, and he is about to face the wrath of the seas. The story of Nezha is a story of transformation, but transformation is always preceded by destruction. To become a god, he first had to break the heart of a general and the pride of a king. The water of the Nine-Bend River was still swirling with the red energy of the armillary sash. The body of the Yaksha had vanished, but the memory of the impact remained. Nezha sat back down on his rock, his breathing steady, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. He felt the universe ring humming against his palm, a low, vibrating note that seemed to harmonize with the very soul of the world. He was waiting. He knew that the sea would not stay silent. He knew that the Dragon King would send someone else, and he was right. But as we leave this first chapter of his life, reflect on the nature of his birth. He was not born of the womb in the way of men. He was released from a shell by a sword. He was a creature born of violence, destined for violence, yet seeking a purity that only the Lotus could eventually provide. He was the son of Li Jing, the commander of Chentang Pass, but he was also the third prince of the heavens, a title he would earn in blood and bone before the end of his journey. The shadows in the pass were lengthening, and the lamps in Lady Yin's chambers were being lit. She was praying, her heart heavy with a premonition she could not articulate. Li Jing was sharpening his own blade, his mind filled with the image of the flesh ball and the divine child. And in the depths of the East Sea, the Dragon King was summoning his son, the third prince, Ao Bing, to deal with the intruder. The stage was set for a tragedy of mythic proportions. Before the first star appeared in the night sky, the second challenge would arrive at the riverbank. It would not be a mere scout this time. It would be a prince of the blood, a dragon of the royal line, and the conflict between the two princes, one of water and one of fire, would change the map of the world forever. Nezha stood up, shaking the water from his red sash, ready to meet his fate. He was no longer the boy who was born from a ball of flesh. He was the storm that was about to break. The East Sea was not merely a body of water. It was a living, breathing sovereignty, a liquid empire that stretched into the infinite horizon. To the mortals of the Chentang Pass, the sea was a provider and a punisher, a vast blue mystery governed by ancient laws and even more ancient rulers. At its heart, leagues below the churning surface where the light of the sun becomes a pale, ethereal memory, lay the Crystal Palace. This was the seat of Ao Guang, the Dragon King of the East, a monarch whose lineage was older than the mountains and whose word was the law of the tides. The palace itself was a marvel of celestial architecture, built of coral that shimmered like rubies, pillars of polished jade that pulsed with internal light, and walls of translucent crystal that allowed the inhabitants to watch the endless dance of the deep-sea currents. Inside these halls, silence was a sacred thing, broken only by the rhythmic songs of the whale priests and the soft rustle of sea silk. But on the day Nezha stepped into the Nine-Bend River, that silence was shattered by a vibration that felt like the cracking of the world's foundation. As the young boy washed his red armillary sash, the Hun Tian Ling, the cosmic energy within the silk reacted to the salt of the sea. The sash did not merely move, it vibrated at a frequency that resonated with the very pillars of the Crystal Palace. To the Dragon King, sitting upon his throne of pearls, it felt as if 1,000 bells were being struck simultaneously. The water in the grand hall began to boil and swirl, and the great jade columns groaned under a pressure they were never meant to endure. Ao Guang, a being of immense pride and strategic patience, did not immediately suspect a child. He suspected a rebellion, or perhaps a shifting of the tectonic plates commanded by a rival deity. He was a dragon of majestic proportions, his scales the color of the deep Atlantic, his eyes glowing with the wisdom of 10,000 years. When the Yaksha scout, Li Gen, failed to return, and the tremors only intensified, The Dragon King's patience evaporated into a cold, predatory rage when the news finally reached him, carried by a terrified sea sprite, that a mere human child had slain his scout with a golden ring. The Dragon King felt an insult that could only be washed away in blood. Enter Ao Bing, the third prince of the East Sea. If Nezha was the fire of the stars, Ao Bing was the ice of the abyss. He was his father's pride, a dragon prince who moved with a rigid, lethal elegance. He was not a creature of chaos like Nezha. He was a creature of discipline and tradition. He wore armor crafted from the scales of ancestral dragons, shimmering with a cold, blue luminescence that mimicked the moonlight on the water. His weapon was a jade spear, its tip forged from a meteorite that had fallen into the ocean in the first age of the world. Ao Bing looked at his father, seeing the tremors in the crystal palace and the fury in the old king's eyes. He did not ask for permission. He demanded the right to punish the intruder. A human child dares to stir our waters? Ao Bing's voice was like the sound of ice grinding against rock. I will bring his head to this palace before the tide turns. With a powerful thrust of his tail, the prince ascended. He did not swim toward the surface. He became a part of the water, a blue streak of lightning rising through the darkening depths. On the riverbank, Nezha was still playing. The slaying of the Yaksha had not saddened him. It had energized him. He was a creature of the spirit pearl, and the pearl lived for the heat of the struggle. He was tossing the universe ring into the air and catching it, watching as the golden circle left trails of light against the purple sky. The air around him was growing cold, and the smell of ozone was replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of the deep ocean. The water of the Nine Bend River began to recede, exposing the slippery rocks and the dying weeds, as if the river itself were holding its breath in fear of what was coming. Suddenly, the water exploded. A pillar of white foam rose 20 feet into the air, and from its center emerged a magnificent beast. Ao Bing did not initially show his human form. He appeared as a dragon of the royal line. He was a serpentine marvel, his body twisting in the air with a grace that made the wind itself seem clumsy. His scales were a mosaic of turquoise and silver, and his antlers reached toward the clouds like the branches of a frozen tree. He roared, a sound that shook the leaves from the trees and sent the mountain goats fleeing into the high caves. Nezha looked up, his eyes wide with delight. He did not see a threat. He saw a playmate of worthy proportions. Another one? Nezha laughed, clapping his small hands together. Are you here to tell me the water is too loud, or are you here to dance? The dragon coiled in the air, his eyes glowing with a freezing intensity. He shifted, his body shrinking and hardening until he stood upon the water's surface in his human guise, a tall, beautiful warrior, with skin as pale as foam and eyes as cold as the deep trenches. He pointed his jade spear at Nezha's chest. You are the one they call the third son of Li Jing, Ao Bing said, his voice carrying the weight of the sea's pressure. You have stained our waters with the blood of a servant. You have disturbed the rest of the Dragon King. For these crimes, there is no trial. There is only the end. Nezha tilted his head, the red sash fluttering around him like a living flame. Your servant was rude, and the water belongs to the world. If your father wants his peace, he should find a quieter ocean. I am Nezha, and I do not take orders from things that live in the mud. The insult was the final spark. Ao Bing lunged. The jade spear moved with a speed that defied the laws of physics, a blur of blue light aimed directly at Nezha's throat. But Nezha was not there. He moved like a shadow, his feet barely touching the earth, his body a fluid motion of avoidance. He countered with the universe ring, the golden circle clashing against the jade tip with a sound that cracked the very air. Sparks of gold and blue erupted where the weapons met, each impact sending shockwaves that leveled the tall grass for 100 paces. The battle was a dance of opposites. Ao Bing fought with the precision of a master, his spear thrusting and parrying with a cold, calculated rhythm. He sought the weakness in the boy's guard, the flaw in the divine child's impulsiveness. Nezha, however, fought with a frantic, joyful energy. He did not use a style. He used the elements. He threw the universe ring again and again, the weapon seeking the prince like a hound, only to be deflected by the jade spear. Realizing that the boy was more than a mere mortal, Ao Bing tapped into the power of the tides. He raised his hand, and the river rose with him. A wall of water, 10 feet thick and filled with jagged pieces of ice, surged toward the shore. It was meant to drown the fire of the boy, to crush him under the weight of the East Sea's wrath. But Nezha only smiled. He reached for the armillary sash. With a snap of his wrist, he unfurled the red silk. The sash did not get wet. It burned through the water. As the tidal wave crashed down, Nezha spun the sash above his head, creating a vortex of heat and cosmic energy. The water was not just blocked, it was vaporized. A massive cloud of steam erupted, cloaking the riverbank in a thick white mist. Through the fog, Ao Bing saw the boy's eyes, 2 glowing embers of red light. Desperate now, Ao Bing abandoned his human form and returned to his true dragon shape. He believed his size and his scales would protect him from the child's weapons. He lunged from the mist, his massive jaws open, intending to swallow Nezha whole. The boy stood his ground. As the dragon's head closed in, Nezha leaped. He did not jump away. He jumped onto the dragon's neck. Imagine the scene. A small boy in a red sash, clinging to the mane of a turquoise dragon that spanned the length of a ship. Ao Bing thrashed, soaring into the sky and diving back toward the river, trying to shake the intruder from his back. He breathed frost that turned the air into a blizzard, but Nezha was immune to the cold. The spirit pearl within him was a furnace of divine fire. Nezha raised the universe ring and struck the dragon's skull. The sound was like a hammer hitting a mountain. Ao Bing's vision blurred, and his flight became erratic. Again and again, the golden ring fell, each blow cracking the divine scales and bruising the royal bone. The dragon's roar of defiance turned into a cry of agony. With a final, massive blow to the center of the forehead, Nezha broke the prince's spirit. The dragon fell. He crashed into the shallow waters of the Nine Bend River, his massive body twitching, his turquoise scales losing their luster. Ao Bing, the pride of the East Sea, was dead. In the silence that followed, Nezha stood over the fallen beast. He did not feel the weight of what he had done. He did not see the tragedy of a prince slain by a child. He saw a trophy. He remembered his father, Li Jing, a man who valued strength and utility. He looked at the dragon's long, shimmering body, and his eyes settled on the spine. He had heard the soldiers in the pass talk about the strength of a dragon's tendon, how it was the toughest material in the world, capable of binding even the gods. With a curiosity that was as innocent as it was gruesome, Nezha knelt by the dragon's neck. He used the sharp edge of the universe ring to make an incision. With a strength that belied his small hands, he began to pull. The dragon tendon, a cord of pure white energy and resilient tissue, slowly emerged from the flesh. It was a macabre sight. The divine child, drenched in the silver blood of a dragon, hauling a 20-foot cord from the corpse of a prince. "This will make a fine belt for my father," Nezha whispered to the wind. "He will see that I am not a demon. He will see that I am a hunter of kings." Nezha coiled the dragon tendon around his arm and began the walk back to Chentang Pass. He left the dragon's body to the crows and the currents, unaware that he had just signed his own death warrant. He did not know that the news of Ao Bing's death was already traveling through the water, a ripple of grief that would soon become a flood of vengeance. Back in the Crystal Palace, the change was instantaneous. The water in the Grand Hall turned a deep, funereal black. The songs of the whales stopped. Ao Guang, the Dragon King, felt a sudden, sharp pain in his own heart, a paternal tether snapping in the dark. When his messengers arrived with the news that the third prince had not only been killed but desecrated, the king did not roar. He went silent. And in that silence, a plan was born. The Dragon King would not send another warrior. He would not send a scout. He would go himself, but he would not go as a beast. He would go as a grieving father and a diplomat of the heavens. He transformed himself into a human scholar, dressing in robes of white silk that smelled of the salt spray. He carried a fan made of pearl and a heart filled with a cold, unwavering resolve. He walked out of the sea and onto the dry land of the mortals, his feet leaving wet prints on the dusty road to Chentang Pass. When he arrived at the gates of the fortress, the guards did not see a god. They saw an elderly man of high status, his face a mask of profound sorrow. He demanded to see Li Jing. Inside the commander's residence, Li Jing was already in a state of agitation. He had heard reports of the turmoil at the river, and the sight of Nezha returning with blood on his sash and a white cord in his hand had filled him with an unbearable dread. When the servant announced that a scholar from the east was at the gate, Li Jing knew that the reckoning had arrived. The meeting between the general and the Dragon King was a masterclass in suppressed violence. They sat in the receiving hall, the air thick with the scent of jasmine tea and the underlying metallic tang of the sea. Ao Guang did not shout. He spoke in a voice that was as calm as the surface of a frozen pond. "General Li," the Dragon King said, his eyes fixed on the man who had sired the storm. "Your house has long been a pillar of order in this pass. But today, your third son has committed an act that goes beyond the boundaries of mortal war. He has slain my son, Ao Bing, and he has taken his tendon as a trophy." Li Jing's face turned ashen. He had suspected his son was a monster, but he had never imagined a crime of this magnitude. "My lord," Li Jing stammered, his hand shaking as he held his tea. "I did not know. I have tried to discipline the boy, but he is not of this world." "He is of your blood," the Dragon King countered. "And for the blood of a prince, the heavens demand a price. I am not here to brawl with you, General. I am here to inform you that I will take this matter to the Jade Emperor himself. Your son's soul will be harvested, and your house will be razed to the ground, unless—" Before the king could finish, the doors to the hall burst open. Nezha stood there, still wearing his blood-stained clothes, the dragon tendon hanging from his hand like a common rope. He looked at the scholar, and his eyes narrowed. He felt the sea magic beneath the silk robes. "Why are you talking to my father?" Nezha demanded, his voice devoid of the respect a child should show an elder. "If you are the king of the sea, you should be in your palace. I have your son's belt here. Do you want it back, or should I make one for you too?" Li Jing roared in shame and fury, lunging from his seat to strike his son. But the Dragon King simply stood up. He looked at Nezha with a gaze that promised an eternity of suffering. "Keep your trophy, boy," Ao Guang whispered. "It will be the last thing you ever hold." The Dragon King vanished in a swirl of mist, leaving the hall cold and damp. Li Jing fell back into his chair, his head in his hands. He looked at Nezha, and for the first time he didn't feel anger. He felt a profound, hollow despair. He knew that the walls of Chentang Pass could not protect them from the Jade Emperor. He knew that the summer was over, and the time of the flood was coming. Nezha stood in the center of the room, the dragon tendon still in his hand. For the first time he felt a flicker of confusion. He had won the fight. He had proven his strength. Why was his father weeping? Why was the world so silent? He looked out at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. They looked like cold, distant eyes, watching a tragedy they had already written. The conflict with the sea had only just begun, and the price of his defiance would soon be paid in his own flesh and his own bone. The sky over Chentang Pass did not merely darken. It transformed into a bruised, weeping canopy of impending doom. To understand the gravity of the days that followed the death of the Dragon Prince, one must visualize the psychological weight of an ancient siege. This was not a siege of ladders and arrows, but a siege of the elements themselves. The air grew heavy, with the smell of stagnant salt and the relentless rhythmic drumming of a rain that did not provide life, but threatened to drown it. The mortals in the pass looked up at the mountains and saw not the peaks, but a wall of black clouds that seemed to pulse with a cold, scaly intelligence. In the center of this storm, within the cold stone walls of the commander's residence, the silence was louder than the thunder. Li Jing sat in his study, his armor unbuckled, his face aged by 10 years in a single night. He was a man who lived by the code of the Emperor and the laws of the heavens, yet his own house had become a source of cosmic treason. He looked at his hands and saw only the failure of a father. Lady Yin, meanwhile, remained in the inner chambers, her prayers rising with the incense smoke, her heart caught between the divine nature of her son and the mortal terror of his actions. And Nezha? The boy did not hide. He stood on the battlements of the fortress, the red armillary sash snapping in the gale like a defiant flag. He watched the horizon, his eyes glowing with that same red light that had signaled his birth. He felt the pressure of the sea rising to meet the sky. He was not afraid, but for the first time, he was beginning to feel the weight of his own shadow. He saw the soldiers below, men with families and histories, looking at him with eyes that were no longer filled with awe, but with a growing, desperate resentment. He was the reason the rivers were overflowing. He was the reason the crops were rotting in the fields. The reckoning arrived not as one god, but as four. Ao Guang, the Dragon King of the East, had not come alone. He had summoned his brothers, the three other sovereigns of the great oceans. There was Ao Qin, the Dragon King of the South, whose scales were the color of sun-scorched earth, and whose breath could turn the rain into scalding steam. There was Ao Run, the Dragon King of the West, a master of the shifting sands and the cold, mountain-fed currents, his eyes like polished jade. And finally, there was Ao Shun, the Dragon King of the North, a titan of ice and darkness, whose very presence caused the stone walls of Chentang to crack with frost. The four brothers did not descend to the earth. They coiled in the clouds, their massive bodies weaving through the lightning, creating a spectacle of terror that stretched for miles. The sound of their combined roars was like the grinding of tectonic plates. They commanded the waters of the four oceans to rise, and the Nine-Bend River responded by bursting its banks, the gray surf creeping toward the gates of the fortress. Li Jing! The voice of Ao Guang descended from the clouds, carrying the resonance of 1,000 crashing waves. The time for diplomacy has passed. Your son has slain the royalty of the deep. He has desecrated the body of a prince. The Jade Emperor has been informed, and the mandate of heaven is clear. Either you surrender the boy to the mercy of the waves, or every soul within this pass shall be swallowed by the flood. We shall turn Chentang into a coral reef, and your name shall be remembered only as the man who sired the destruction of his people. Li Jing walked out into the courtyard, the rain drenching his robes, his body trembling with a mixture of rage and profound impotence. He looked up at the dragons, then turned his gaze to Nezha, who had descended from the battlements to stand before his father. The contrast was stark. The massive, ancient powers in the sky, and the small, beautiful boy on the ground. Nezha, Li Jing whispered, his voice cracking. Look at what you have done. I told you that your nature was a curse. I told you that you would bring ruin to this house. You have killed a prince, and now you have killed a city. My son Jinja and Muja are honorable warriors, but you are a demon in a child's skin. I should have ended you the night you were born. The words struck Nezha deeper than any jade spear could. He looked at his father, seeing the genuine hatred and the hollow fear in the man's eyes. He looked at the gates, where the water was beginning to pour through the cracks, and he heard the cries of the people in the streets. For the first time, the divine arrogance of the spirit pearl flickered and died. He realized that his strength was a burden that his parents could not carry. He realized that the debt of his life, the 3 years and 6 months of his mother's suffering, and the honor of his father's name, was a debt he had never paid. In the philosophy of the time, the body was not one's own. It was a gift from the parents. The flesh belonged to the mother, and the bone belonged to the father. To harm the body was to harm the parents. To bring shame to the body was to betray the lineage. Nezha stood in the rain, the red sash dragging in the mud, and he came to a decision that would define his legend for eternity. It was a decision of terrifying maturity and tragic purity. "Dragon Kings!" Nezha shouted, his voice high and clear, cutting through the thunder like a silver bell. "Cease your winds, hold back your tides, the crime is mine, and the debt shall be paid by me alone. My father has no part in this. My mother has no part in this. I am Nezha, the spirit pearl, and I return to you what was never truly mine." He turned to Li Jing. The boy's eyes were no longer fierce. They were calm, filled with a cold, celestial clarity. "Father," Nezha said, "you have always feared what I am. You have always seen me as a burden on your honor. Today, I set you free. I return to you the bones you gave me. I return to my mother the flesh she carried. From this moment, I am no longer your son, and you are no longer responsible for my storms." Nezha reached for a sword that lay near a fallen guard. He did not use the universe ring or the red sash. Those were the tools of a warrior. For this act, he needed the tool of a mortal. He stood in the center of the courtyard, the 4 dragon kings watching from the clouds, their fury momentarily replaced by a stunned, macabre curiosity. What followed is a scene that has been whispered in the halls of Chinese mythology for thousands of years. A scene of such visceral sacrifice that it challenges the very concept of the hero. Nezha raised the blade. With a steady hand and a heart that did not falter, he began the ritual of self-dissection. He spoke to his mother first, though she was hidden behind the doors of the inner chambers, her weeping audible even through the storm. "Mother," he whispered, "for the months of your heaviness, for the love you gave to a child of fire, I give you back your gift." With a swift, precise motion, he carved the flesh from his arms and his chest. There was no cry of pain. There was only the sound of the rain and the rhythmic splashing of his own divine blood hitting the stones. He laid the flesh upon the ground, a grisly offering to the woman who had protected him. Then he turned his attention to his father. "General Li," he said, his voice growing thin but remaining firm, "for the name you gave me, and for the discipline you tried to instill, I give you back the structure of my life." He began to carve deeper, separating the bone from the sinew. One by one, he laid his own bones upon the altar of the earth. He gave back the ribs that had protected his heart, the limbs that had carried him to the river, and finally, the very frame of his existence. The Dragon Kings watched in silence. Even their ancient, predatory hearts were chilled by the sight. This was not the death of a demon. This was the dissolution of a god. The water around the fortress began to recede, the tides pulled back by the sheer force of the boy's will and the magnitude of his sacrifice. The clouds began to break, and a single pale ray of moonlight fell upon the courtyard, illuminating the remains of what had once been the most beautiful child in the pass. Nezha stood for a moment longer, a spirit held together by nothing but the sheer intensity of his soul. He looked at Li Jing one last time. There was no anger in his gaze, only a profound, echoing emptiness. Then, with a final motion, he ended his own breath. The spirit of the spirit pearl left the broken shell of flesh and bone, rising into the cold night air like a spark from a dying fire. The body of Nezha was gone. In its place was a pile of white bone and red flesh, a tragic testament to the price of filial duty and divine rebellion. The 4 dragon kings, their vengeance sated and their pride humbled by a child's resolve, turned their backs on Chentang Pass. They dissolved into the mists, returning to their underwater kingdoms, leaving the world quiet, damp, and haunted. Li Jing stood in the courtyard, the sword lying at his feet. He looked at the remains of his son, and he felt nothing. The relief he expected did not come. The honor he sought to protect felt like ash in his mouth. He had his pass. He had his emperor's favor. But he had lost a piece of the cosmos that he could never replace. He ordered the servants to gather the remains, but he did not allow them to be buried in the family tomb. To him, Nezha was still a transgressor, even in death. But the soul of Nezha was not finished. A spirit born of the spirit pearl does not simply vanish into the yellow springs of the underworld. He drifted through the mists, a lonely, glowing ember, seeking a way back to the light. He traveled to the Golden Light Cave, to the feet of his master, Taiyi Genren. The immortal looked at the flickering spirit of his disciple and sighed. He had known this day would come. He had seen the threads of fate weaving toward this tragedy since the day the Itopu was cleaved. "You have paid the debt of the body," Taiyi Genren said, his voice like the rustle of leaves in an ancient forest. "But the debt of the soul is yet to be settled. You are a warrior without a weapon, a general without an army, a ghost in a world that is not yet done with you." Nezha's spirit pulsed with a faint, desperate light. He did not want to be a ghost. He wanted to return to the world, to find his mother, to prove that his fire could be used for more than just destruction. He asked his master for a new form, a way to walk the earth once more. Taiyi Genren instructed the spirit to go to a specific temple on a nearby mountain. He told Nezha that if he could inspire the people to build a temple in his honor, and if he could receive the incense and the prayers of the faithful for 3 years, he could manifest a new body, a body of pure spirit, untethered to the blood and bone of his parents. Nezha's spirit traveled to the mountain. He appeared in the dreams of the local people, showing them his sacrifice and his sorrow. Touched by the story of the child who died for his city, the villagers built a small temple. They called it the Temple of the Third Prince. Lady Yin, hearing of the temple, traveled there in secret. She brought silk and incense, weeping at the altar of the son she had lost. For months the temple flourished. The smoke of the incense was like food to Nezha's spirit, allowing him to grow stronger, to begin to solidify his presence in the mortal world. But Li Jing found out. The general's hatred for his son had not ended with the boy's death. To Li Jing, the temple was a mockery of his authority. It was a place where people worshipped a demon. He traveled to the mountain with a company of soldiers. He did not see a place of mourning. He saw a threat to the order he represented. "Destroy it," Li Jing commanded. The soldiers, fearful of the general's wrath, tore down the walls of the temple. They smashed the altar and burned the silk. Li Jing himself took his mace and shattered the clay statue that the people had built to represent Nezha. He scattered the incense and cursed the ground, forbidding anyone from speaking the name of the third prince again. In the shadows of the ruins, Nezha's spirit watched. He felt the connection to the mortal world snapping once more. He saw his mother's tears being trampled into the dirt. The calmness he had felt during his sacrifice vanished, replaced by a cold, white-hot fury that made the very air of the mountain vibrate. He had given his flesh. He had given his bone. He had given his life. And still, his father sought to erase him from existence. The bond was finally broken. Nezha no longer felt the debt of the son. He felt the rage of the wronged deity. He flew back to the Golden Light Cave, his spirit now a raging storm of golden energy. He stood before Taiyi Genren and demanded a body. Not a body of prayer, and not a body of flesh, but a body of war. "My father has denied me a grave," Nezha's voice echoed through the cave. No longer the voice of a child, but the voice of a cosmic force. "He has denied me a memory. If the world of men will not have me as a son, then the heavens shall have me as a weapon." Taiyi Genren nodded. He walked to a pond near the cave, where the lotus blossoms grew as large as carriage wheels. He plucked the roots, the stems, and the petals. He began to chant the secret names of the earth and the sky. This was the beginning of the recreation, the transition from the boy of bone to the god of the lotus. But as we leave Nezha in the darkness of the cave, between death and his new life, reflect on the tragedy of Chentang Pass. The water had receded, but the scars remained. The house of Li Jing was quiet, but it was the quiet of a tomb. The sacrifice of Nezha had saved the city, but it had shattered the soul of his family. The boy who was born from an 8 topu had died as a martyr, only to be denied his peace by the man who had failed to love him. The next time Nezha would walk the earth, he would not be looking for a mother's embrace or a father's approval. He would be looking for justice, and he would be carrying the fire of the lotus in his heart. The Golden Light Cave on Mount Qianyuan was a place where time did not flow, it lingered. To envision this sanctuary, one must imagine a realm where the air itself is a golden haze, thick with the scent of ancient moss, sun-warmed stone, and the ethereal perfume of flowers that never wilt. Here, the silence was not an absence of sound, but a presence of peace, a heavy, velvet stillness that could soothe the most turbulent soul. This was the dwelling of Taiyi Genren, an immortal whose wisdom predated the dynasties, and whose mastery over the laws of life and death was absolute. Within the depths of this cave, away from the prying eyes of the jade courts and the vengeful reaches of the dragon kings, the spirit of Nezha drifted. He was no longer the boy of Chentang Pass. He was a flicker of consciousness, a cooling ember of the spirit pearl, stripped of the flesh that had been carved away and the bones that had been returned to the earth. He was a soul in transition, caught between the memory of a father's hatred and the potential of a celestial destiny. The rage that had sustained him in the ruins of his temple had settled into a quiet, vibrating intensity, waiting for a vessel that could hold its fire. Taiyi Genren sat by the edge of a subterranean pool, a body of water so clear and still it mirrored the constellations that shone through the fissures in the cave ceiling. This was no ordinary pond. It was a cradle of creation, fed by the spiritual veins of Mount Qianyuan. Floating upon its surface were lotus blossoms of such size and purity they seemed to be carved from frozen moonlight. Their leaves were vast, emerald fans that caught the golden motes of light drifting through the air. The immortal understood the necessity of the moment. He knew that the mortal world, currently fracturing under the weight of the Shang dynasty's corruption, required its vanguard. But Nezha could not return as a man of blood and bone. Blood can be spilled, and bone can be broken. To face the coming storms, the third prince required a form that was as resilient as the earth and as pure as the light. He required the body of the lotus. Close your eyes and imagine the ritual that followed, for it was a masterpiece of metaphysical craftsmanship. Taiyi Genren did not use tools of iron or fire. He used the power of his will and the secret syllables of the Tao. He reached into the water and plucked 2 lotus flowers, their petals white as jade and tipped with the softest pink of a dawning sky. These would become the foundation of the new body. He then gathered 3 large lotus leaves, their surfaces shimmering with droplets of dew that contained the essence of the morning mist. He arranged these elements upon a slab of white marble, placing the lotuses and the leaves in a geometric pattern that mirrored the alignment of the human spirit. 1 lotus for the head, another for the heart, the leaves to form the limbs and the torso. To the casual observer, it would have looked like a simple arrangement of flora, but to the immortal, it was a biological blueprint. He began to chant, his voice a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to harmonize with the very breathing of the mountain. Spirit of the pearl, light of the void, Taiyi Genren whispered, his words weaving through the air like threads of silk. The debt of the flesh is paid. The debt of the bone is settled. Enter now the green of the leaf and the white of the flower. Rise not as a son of men, but as a prince of the lotus. The flickering spirit of Nezha felt the pull. It was not a violent attraction, but a soft, inexorable invitation. The golden ember descended, hovering over the marble slab. As it touched the lotus petals, a transformation began that defies the logic of the natural world. The flowers did not wilt. They began to pulse with a vibrant internal light. The emerald leaves did not dry. They began to knit together, their veins thickening into a system of spiritual meridians. The air in the cave began to hum. A gentle wind circled the marble slab, carrying with it the fragrance of 1,000 springs. Slowly, the plant matter began to shift and change. The soft white of the petals deepened into the luminosity of healthy skin. The green of the leaves transformed into the suppleness of muscle and sinew. There was no blood, for blood is a tether to mortality. Instead, a luminous golden fluid, the ichor of the immortals, began to flow through the new veins. There was a sudden, brilliant flash of light, like a lightning bolt captured in a bottle. When the light faded, the lotus blossoms and leaves were gone. In their place lay a youth, appearing perhaps 14 or 15 years of age. He was taller than the boy of Chentang Pass, his limbs long and powerful, his skin possessing a translucent, jade-like quality. This was the new Nezha. He was the Lotus' 3rd prince, a being whose body was formed from the purity of the pond, immune to the rot of the earth and the poisons of the serpent. Nezha opened his eyes. They were no longer just the eyes of a child. They were reservoirs of celestial power, glowing with a steady, unwavering flame. He sat up, his movements possessing a fluid, effortless grace. He looked at his hands, feeling the strength within them, a strength that did not rely on muscle alone, but on the infinite energy of the universe. He felt light, untethered, as if the gravity of the world no longer held a claim on his soul. "I am back," Nezha said, his voice carrying a resonance that made the cave walls vibrate. It was a voice that commanded the air, a voice that had traveled through death and returned with the authority of the heavens. Taiyi Genren smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "You have a new body, my disciple, but a warrior is defined by his tools as much as his spirit. The world outside is descending into chaos. The dragons still thirst for your soul, and your father still guards his pass with a heart of stone. You must be prepared." The immortal led Nezha to the back of the cave, where a forge stood that was powered not by coal, but by the breath of the mountain. From the flames, Li Jing retrieved a weapon that seemed to be made of solidified sunbeams. This was the Huojian Qiang, the fire-tipped spear. Its shaft was made of an ancient, indestructible wood, and its head was a leaf-shaped blade that shimmered with a constant, dancing flame. This spear did not just pierce the flesh, it burned through the spirit of the enemy. It was a weapon of absolute focus, a conduit for Nezha's internal fire. Next, the immortal presented 2 golden wheels, each about the size of a chariot's hub. They were intricately carved with symbols of the wind and the fire, and they seemed to vibrate with an impatient energy. These were the Feng Huo Lun, the wind-fire wheels. Li Jing cast them to the floor, and they did not settle. They began to spin, igniting with a brilliant, roaring flame that did not consume the stone. "Step upon them," the master commanded. As Nezha placed his feet upon the golden hubs, he felt a surge of power that nearly knocked him back. The wheels did not just carry him, they became an extension of his will. With a thought, he rose from the floor, hovering in the air, as if the wind itself were his servant. These wheels allowed him to traverse the 9 heavens and the 4 oceans in the blink of an eye. They were the source of his legendary speed, a manifestation of the storm that had heralded his birth. The immortal then returned the treasures that had been Nezha's since his first life. He draped the red armillary sash, the Hun Tian Ling, around the youth's shoulders. The silk seemed to recognize its master, pulsing with a deep crimson glow. He placed the universe ring, the Chankun Quan, upon Nezha's wrist. The golden circle felt heavier now, more grounded, its ability to shatter mountains refined by the boy's journey through the void. Finally, Li Jing gave him a series of smaller, hidden weapons. The Jin Juan, a golden brick that could be thrown with lethal accuracy, and a set of poisoned daggers forged from the stings of celestial bees. Nezha stood in the center of the cave, a figure of terrifying majesty. He was draped in red and gold, standing upon wheels of fire, clutching a spear that breathed flames. He was no longer the tragic victim of a general's fear. He was the vanguard of the gods. "You are ready," Li Jing whispered. "But remember, Nezha, your body is now made of the lotus. The lotus grows in the mud, yet it remains untainted. You will face much mud in the world of men, betrayal, war, and the darkness of the human heart. Do not let it stain you. Use your fire to protect the innocent, and your spear to pierce the veil of corruption." Nezha bowed low to his master, a gesture of genuine gratitude. He felt the weight of his destiny, but he also felt a lingering, sharp coldness in his heart when he thought of Chentang Pass. He thought of his mother's tears and his father's mace. He thought of the temple that had been turned to dust. The transformation had given him a new body, but it had not erased his memories. If anything, it had clarified them. He tested the wind-fire wheels, soaring through the vast golden corridors of the cave. He moved with a speed that blurred the edges of reality, the flames from the wheels leaving trails of fire against the ancient stone. He practiced with the fire-tipped spear, the blade whistling through the air, leaving ribbons of flame in its wake. He felt a sense of completion he had never known in his first life. He was no longer a biological accident. He was a deliberate creation of the Tao. The significance of the lotus body cannot be overstated in the context of Chinese spiritual thought. In the mortal world, to die is usually to end, or to enter the cycle of reincarnation as a different being. But Nezha's recreation was a defiance of this cycle. By using the lotus, Taiyi Genren had bypassed the traditional laws of the underworld. Nezha was an immortal spirit in a spiritualized body. He had no soul to be harvested by the kings of hell, and no flesh to be corrupted by the passage of time. He was a living paradox, a deity born of a plant, a warrior who did not breathe, a son who had no father. This new identity, as the Lotus Third Prince, Lianhua San Taizi, marks the beginning of Nezha's role as a protector of the people. In the rural villages and the crowded cities of ancient China, this version of Nezha became the most beloved. He was the god who understood suffering because he had suffered. He was the god who understood betrayal because his own father had tried to erase him. The lotus was the symbol of this resilience, a flower that rises from the darkest, most stagnant depths of a pond to blossom in the clean air of the sun. But before he could become the protector of the people, he had to settle the score with the man who had broken him. The rage that Nezha had felt when his temple was destroyed had not vanished. It had been refined. It was now a cold, tactical necessity. He knew that as long as Li Jing stood as a commander of men, the shadow of the father would always haunt the son. "Master," Nezha said, his feet hovering an inch above the ground on his wheels of fire. "I must go back. I must go to Chentang Pass. My father has denied me a grave, and he has denied my mother her peace. I must show him that the storm he tried to drown has returned with the sun." Taiyi Genren did not try to stop him. He knew that the confrontation between father and son was an inevitable part of the cosmic balance. He knew that the rigid order of Li Jing and the chaotic justice of Nezha had to clash one final time before they could both find their places in the celestial hierarchy. "Go," the immortal said, "but do not let your anger blind you to the truth of your own power. You are no longer the child he can strike with a sword. You are the lotus. Let your father see the fire you carry, and let the heavens judge the outcome." Nezha turned toward the mouth of the cave. With a sudden, powerful surge of energy from the wind-fire wheels, he shot out of the golden light cave and into the blue sky of the mortal world. He was a streak of red and gold, a falling star rising back toward the firmament. The people in the valleys below looked up and saw a trail of fire in the daylight, thinking it was a sign of the changing seasons or a message from the gods. He flew over the Nine Bend River, where the water was now calm, and the body of the dragon prince was a distant memory. He flew over the mountains where the villages were still recovering from the floods. He moved with a speed that outran the wind, his heart beating with the rhythm of a war drum. Chentang Pass appeared on the horizon, its stone walls looking small and fragile from his height. He saw the commander's residence, the place where he had been born from a ball of flesh and where he had died on the stones. He saw the gates where his father stood guard, a man who believed the threat had passed. Imagine the sound as Nezha approached, not the sound of a boy's footsteps, but the roaring of a furnace and the whistling of a celestial gale. The soldiers on the battlements looked up, their eyes widening in a terror they had not felt even during the dragon's siege. They saw a figure wreathed in flame, standing upon wheels of fire, clutching a spear that dripped with light. They saw the third prince, returned from the void. Nezha descended slowly, the flames from his wheels scorching the ground as he landed in the center of the fortress courtyard. He did not look at the soldiers. He did not look at the people. He looked at the door of the main hall. Li Jing! Nezha's voice was a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the pass. Come out and face the spirit you tried to burn. Come out and see the body that the Lotus has given me. The debt of the sun is paid, but the debt of the enemy is just beginning. The war moved through the provinces like a wildfire. Nezha was present at the crossing of the Yellow River, his fire wheels turning the icy water into steam to clear a path for the infantry. He was there during the siege of various fortresses, where he would fly over the walls and strike the enemy commanders before they could even draw their swords. He became a legend among the common soldiers, a symbol of the divine favor that rested upon the house of Zhou. They called him the Third Prince, not out of a familial connection to their leaders, but as a title of supreme respect for his celestial rank. But the war was also a test of Nezha's evolution. In his first life, he had been impulsive, his violence a reaction to his own untamed energy. In the War of the Gods, his violence was disciplined. He began to understand the weight of the mandate. He saw the suffering of the common people under King Zhou's rule, the heavy taxes, the cruel punishments like the snake pit and the bronze toaster. He realized that his fire was not just a weapon for his own satisfaction, but a tool to cauterize the wounds of the empire. The lotus was growing in the mud of war, but it was remaining white, its purity defined by its service to the greater good. We must also look at Nezha's relationships with his fellow immortals during this time. He was often paired with young Jian, the Erlang Shen, who possessed the third eye of truth, while young Jian was the strategist, the master of transformation and calculation. Nezha was the raw power, the kinetic energy that executed the plan. There was a mutual respect between them, a bond forged in the fires of 100 battles. They represented the two sides of the celestial guardian, the eye that sees the truth and the hand that strikes the lie. The campaign culminated in the final march toward Zhaoga. The Shang dynasty, realizing its end was near, unleashed its final, most desperate defenses. This was the 10,000 Immortals Array, a labyrinth of spiritual traps and ancient deities that blocked the path to the capital. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and the low hum of thousands of voices chanting forbidden sutras. It was a space where the laws of reality were suspended, where a single step could lead to an eternity of torment. Nezha rode into the heart of the array. He did not hesitate. His wind-fire wheels roared, pushing back the shadows of the sorcery. He encountered generals who fought with shadows and magicians who threw poisoned sand, but the red armillary sash protected him, spinning around his body to create a barrier of divine light. He was the spearhead of the breakthrough, the light that guided the Zhou generals through the darkness of the Shang's final stand. The fall of Zhaoga was not a quiet affair. It was a cataclysm. As the Zhou army breached the gates, King Zhou retreated to his star-picking tower, surrounding himself with his treasures and his concubines. Daji, the fox spirit, tried to escape, but the divine hunters were upon her. Nezha stood amidst the burning ruins of the palace, his spear reflecting the flames of the falling empire. He watched as the star-picking tower was engulfed in fire, a fire that signaled the end of the Shang and the birth of a new era. The war ended with the Investiture of the gods. Jiang Xia stood upon a high altar, holding the list of those who had fallen and those who were to be elevated to the celestial bureaucracy. Thousands of spirits gathered to hear their names called, to receive their ranks and their duties in the new heavenly order. Nezha stood among the living, his lotus body still vibrant and pulsing with light. He was not given a rank in the underworld or a minor governorship of a star. He was confirmed in his position as the central vanguard of the heavens, the eternal protector of the divine gates. Reflect on the image of Nezha at the end of this war. He is a youth who has seen the rise and fall of empires. He has stood against kings and dragons, and he has walked through the fire of his own death and rebirth. He is no longer the demon child feared by his father. He is a pillar of the cosmic order. The fire that had once burned his own home had now helped to forge a new world. The significance of Nezha's generalship in the Fengshen Yanyi is central to his character's enduring popularity. He represents the ideal of the divine youth, the idea that power, when guided by a righteous cause, can overcome even the most ancient and entrenched corruption. He is the archetype of the rebel who becomes the guardian. In the silence that followed the fall of the Shang, as the first bells of the Zhou dynasty began to ring, Nezha did not return to a mortal life. He ascended back to the heavens, his wheels of fire carrying him into the stars, but his footprint was permanently etched into the soil of the earth. But even after the wars were over, and the gods were assigned their places, Nezha's story did not end. For the heavens are never truly at peace, and new challenges would arise in the centuries to follow. He would be called upon to defend the gates against a new kind of rebel, a monkey king, born from stone, who would challenge the very foundations of the Jade Palace. But that is a story for another age. As we close this chapter on the War of the Gods, listen to the distant echo of the wind-fire wheels. They are the heartbeat of the Protector, the constant reminder that as long as there is corruption in the world, the Lotus Prince will be there to meet it with his fire. The incense in the temples of the Zhou began to rise, and for the first time in generations, the prayers of the people were answered with clarity. Nezha had fulfilled his purpose. He had been the Spirit Pearl, the Vanguard, and the Lotus. He had proven that one could return from the bone and the flesh to become something that even time cannot touch. The war was won, the gods were invested, and the third prince was finally at peace with his own power. Centuries passed over the Middle Kingdom like shadows drifting across the face of a mountain. The Zhou dynasty, which Nezha had helped to forge in the fires of the War of the Gods, had itself risen, flourished, and eventually dissolved into the mists of history. New empires rose in its wake: the Qin, the Han, the Tang, each adding new layers to the stone of the earth and the stories of the people. But in the celestial realms, time possessed a different rhythm. To an immortal of the lotus body, 1,000 years was but the slow unfolding of a single petal. Nezha, the third prince, remained at his post as the marshal of the central altar, the vanguard of the Jade Emperor's host. He was no longer a youth of fire and rage, but a seasoned guardian of the cosmic order, his name spoken with a mixture of reverence and caution by every spirit in the 9 heavens. However, the peace of the heavens is a fragile equilibrium, a silence that waits for the next storm. And that storm arrived not from the depths of the sea or the corruption of a mortal king, but from a rock on the mountain of flowers and fruit. To understand the next great chapter of Nezha's existence, one must look to the emergence of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. If Nezha was the fire born of a celestial pearl, Wukong was the chaos born of a primordial stone. When the great sage equal to heaven began his rebellion, smashing the pillars of the Jade Palace and crossing his name out of the ledger of death, the heavens turned once more to their most reliable weapon. The encounter between Nezha and Sun Wukong, recorded in the Shiyuji, or Journey to the West, is one of the most significant moments in mythological history. It was a clash between two archetypes of rebellion: the divine youth, who had been tamed by duty, and the wild spirit who refused to acknowledge any master. When Wukong's defiance reached its peak, Li Jing, now the pagoda-bearing heavenly king, was ordered to lead the celestial army to the mountain of flowers and fruit. Beside him, standing upon wheels of fire and clutching his spear, was Nezha. Imagine the atmosphere on that day. The sky over the mountain was obscured by 100,000 celestial soldiers, their golden armor reflecting the sunlight in a blinding display of military might. Opposite them, sitting atop the jagged cliffs, was the Monkey King, draped in his phoenix feather cap and golden chainmail, holding the Rui Jingu Bang, the pillar that could grow to the size of a mountain or shrink to the size of a needle. The silence between the two forces was thick with the scent of ozone and the anticipation of a conflict that would shake the heavens. Nezha was the first to step forward. He did not come with insults. He came with the weight of his rank. He descended on his wind-fire wheels, a streak of red and gold that carved through the clouds. Wukong, sitting casually on a rock, looked at the youth and laughed, a sound that echoed through the valleys. "And who is this pretty boy?" the Monkey King mocked, his voice filled with a playful, dangerous energy. "Is the Jade Emperor so desperate that he sends a child to play at war?" Nezha did not flinch. He had been called a demon, a ghost, and a monster, but the mockery of a monkey did not touch the purity of his Lotus spirit. "I am the third prince of the Lotus," he replied, his voice a steady, rhythmic chime. "I have quelled the dragons of the four seas and cleared the path for the sons of Jo. I have come to return you to the heavens in chains, or to leave your spirit in the dust." The battle that followed was a spectacle of divine transformation. As the two warriors charged, the laws of physics were suspended. Wukong grew to a massive size, his staff expanding to crush the earth, but Nezha countered with a feat of high magic. He activated his supreme form, the San Tu Liu Bi, the form of 3 heads and 6 arms. In this state, Nezha was a whirlwind of celestial iron. One set of arms held the fire-tipped spear, another the universe ring, and the third the armillary sash and his golden daggers. He was no longer a youth. He was a geometric manifestation of combat, a 6-armed god of war who could look in all directions and strike with the speed of a thought. The clashing of the golden cudgel and the universe ring sent sparks into the sky that looked like falling stars. Each blow of Nezha's spear was met by the fluid, unpredictable movements of the Monkey King. They fought for 30 rounds, their silhouettes blurring against the sun, the fire from the wheels, and the golden light of the staff, creating a kaleidoscope of violence. Nezha used his red sash to entwine the mountain, trying to pull the ground from under Wukong's feet, while the monkey transformed into 1,000 copies of himself, each one striking at the prince from a different angle. Eventually, Wukong used his superior trickery. He plucked a hair from his neck, changed it into a fake version of himself to distract Nezha, and struck the prince from behind. Nezha, sensing the blow too late, was forced to retreat. This defeat was rare for the third prince, but it served a profound purpose in his narrative arc. It showed that even the most disciplined fire of the heavens could be outwitted by the raw, untamed ingenuity of nature. It was a meeting of equals, two beings who had both defied death in their own ways, standing on opposite sides of the celestial law. In the later chapters of Journey to the West, the relationship between Nezha and the Monkey King shifted from enemies to allies. When Sun Wukong was eventually recruited to protect the monk Xuanzang on his pilgrimage to the West, Nezha often appeared as a celestial helper. When the pilgrims were trapped by demons that even Wukong could not defeat, demons like the Red Boy or the Great Bull Demon, Nezha would descend from the clouds with his golden pagoda or his fire wheels. He became the wise elder brother of the martial world, providing the necessary divine backup to ensure that the journey continued. This transition highlights the ultimate evolution of Nezha, from a rebellious child who broke the world to a pillar of stability, who ensures that the spiritual path remains open for others. Beyond the pages of the great novels, we must reflect on Nezha's enduring legacy in the actual worship and daily lives of the people. To the Taoists, he is the marshal of the central altar, Zhongtan Yuan Shui. To the Buddhists, he is a protector of the Dharma, often equated with the spirit Nalakuvara from the older Vedic texts. But to the common people of southern China, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia, he is simply Naja San Taizi, the third prince. Walk into a temple dedicated to him today, and you will feel an atmosphere that is strikingly different from the somber, quiet reverence of other deities. Nezha's temples are vibrant, loud, and filled with a sense of kinetic energy. His statues depict him as the eternal youth, standing upon his wheels of fire, his face a mixture of fierce determination and childlike innocence. He is the patron god of those who live on the edges of society, the rebels, the drivers, the soldiers, and the children who feel the weight of their parents' expectations. The rituals of his worship often involve Nezha dancing, where practitioners enter a trance and mimic the movements of the god, wielding spears and rings to cleanse a space of negative energy. This is a manifestation of his role as the great exorcist. Because he has no mortal flesh, because he is made of the lotus, he is immune to the corruption of ghosts and the poisons of the dark world. He is the ultimate cauterizer of evil, his fire burning away the stagnant spirits that cling to the shadows of the mortal realm. But there is a deeper, psychological reason for his immortality. Nezha represents the eternal child, puer aeternus. He is the part of the human spirit that refuses to be crushed by the rigidity of tradition or the coldness of a father's law. He is the martyr of individuality. Every child who has been misunderstood by their family, every person who has had to break themselves down to rebuild their own identity, finds a mirror in the story of the Lotus Prince. He is the proof that even if you are carved away to the bone, even if you are denied a grave and a name, you can rise again. You can build a body of lotus and walk upon the wind. The symbols associated with him carry this legacy into our modern consciousness. The wind-fire wheels represent the speed of the mind and the restlessness of the spirit. The fire-tipped spear, is the focus of the will, the ability to pierce through the illusions of the world to find the truth. The red sash is the protection of the divine, a reminder that we are wrapped in the grace of the heavens, even in our darkest moments. And the lotus? The lotus remains the ultimate symbol of the soul. It is the flower that needs the mud to grow, yet refuses to let a single speck of dirt stain its petals. Nezha is that flower, blooming in the mud of the Shang Wars and the conflicts of the heavens, yet remaining forever pure and forever young. As we reach the conclusion of this long journey through the life of the third prince, imagine him one last time. He is not a static figure in a book, and he is not a silent statue in a temple. He is the spark of static in the air before a storm. He is the flicker of red on the horizon at dawn. He is the sound of the wind whistling through the high mountain passes. He is the reminder that the universe is not just a place of order and law, but a place of fire and transformation. The story of Nezha began in a ball of flesh and ended in the stars. He died a son and was reborn a god. He wrestled dragons and outran thoughts. He stood against his father and became a king of the heavens. He is the spirit pearl, the vanguard of the new age, and the guardian of the central altar. His fire does not consume, it illuminates. His spear does not just kill, it clears the path for the future. Listen to the silence that has returned to the Golden Light Cave. The immortal Taiyi Genren still sits by his pool, watching the lotus blossoms drift on the water. The mountains of Kunlun still touch the clouds, and the four oceans still churn with the memory of the dragon kings. But the world is safe, because the Lotus Prince is watching. From his throne in the heavens, he looks down at the mortals on the earth, sensing their struggles and hearing their prayers. And when the shadows grow too long, and the corruption of the world becomes too heavy, he steps onto his wheels of fire and descends once more. Thank you for journeying with me through the mists of Chinese mythology, from the gates of Chentang Pass to the heights of the Jade Palace. If you found peace in the story of the Lotus Prince, and if his fire has touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to Hearths of Myths. May your spirit be as resilient as the lotus. May your path be cleared by the fire of the vanguard. And may you always find the strength to redefine yourself against the storms of the world. Close your eyes now. The wheels of fire are fading into the distance, leaving only the scent of lotus and the cool, clean air of the morning. The stars are at peace, and the heavens are secure. The third prince has returned to his watch, and the world is finally still. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the golden light of the lotus.